Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. What I wanted to do here today is give you guys a little tour and a little comparison between my old daily driver, my 2010 Civic LX Sport 4-door sedan, and my new 2023 Honda Civic Sport hatchback 6-speed manual. And this car is a 5-speed manual. But if you take a look at the specs online, the new Civic hatchback is actually 1 inch longer than this car. New Civic hatchback is 179 inches long, and my old sedan here is just under 178, I believe. Looking at them from the side, it's very hard to tell, but you know, the camera might give an illusion, but the hatchback is just a tweak over 1 inch longer. However, the weight of the cars is about 250 pounds different. The title for my 2010 Civic is 2624 pounds, and I believe this is 2877. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comments of what the title says. So about 250 pounds difference between these cars over 13 years of development. I should really say this car was kind of designed in 2006. In 2009 they gave it the different front bumper and a little bit nicer interior and whatnot for the LXS trim. The proportions of the cars is where the real design differences start to stand out. The overall flow of the body lines on the 8th gen here, I do actually prefer. I think it looks more sculpted, more aerodynamic, and it flows from front to back a little smoother. You can see the hood is significantly shorter than the new car, and your windshield as a result is at a much lower angle, so the windshield itself is very, very long compared to the new car, which allows you to have the wipers swipe from each end up and down, and this one pivots from the far side still, and they kind of both go in a non-traditional way. So I thought that's always cool about the 8th gen. The wipers in it really kick ass. They're really, really nice. But proportions, you got a squared off back on the sedan for the 8th gen. Civic hatchback has more of a sloped rear end, but it does have like a nice little lip integrated with a hatch, so it's not a complete egg like the coupes, the 8th gen coupes of this era. It's a little bit of an illusion with the 8th gen, but the driving and the seating position where the steering wheel is in relation to the front tip of the bumper is actually very similar to the new car, but when you drive them, you get a totally different experience. In this car, you have the dashboard that's like 6 miles long, it looks like, in front of you, and you can't see the hood when you're driving. So you feel like you're right on top of the road. You feel closer to the front of the car while driving the 8th gen than this car. This car feels like a much bigger car to drive when you're driving. This windshield's much shorter, and you see the entire hood while you're driving. So it feels like things are much farther away from you and makes the car feel bigger, which in turn kind of makes you feel like you're going slower on the road at the same speed as the 8th gen. As you can see, Honda, has their traditional wiper set up on this one where they pivot from the middle for the passenger and over underneath here for the driver. As you can see, they move just like that together. One thing I will mention is, well, it's actually an observation just while touching these, you can move these a lot more floppy than the 8th gen. But I'll get into it in my dislikes video about this car. The wipers on this car is probably one of the worst designs I've ever seen on a car for practicality. So these are the factory 18 by 8 inch wheels on the 2023, and on my 2010 I have 17 by 8, so it's the same width as this new car, but they're on 225 wide tires as opposed to 235s on the new Civic here. But the proportions, you can see again, totally different. There's a lot more area on the front of the new car for rock chips on the hood. The hood is, it looks like it's twice as long as the 8th gen. However, it's much more squared off. So the 8th gen is still more prone in a way to rock chips on the hood because the angle that it's facing the ground is significantly more than this squared off one on the new one, where it's kind of more parallel to the ground and then squares right off in the front. The new one looks significantly less aerodynamic, And it might actually be if it didn't have all the aero work underneath the car with these new cars with all the trays and stuff, because the aero underneath these older Civics is very dirty since everything's exposed. But you know, the new car does squeak out 1 to 2 mpg better than the old car, despite being 250 pounds heavier. But you know, just looking at it, I would think this car is not as aerodynamic as the old sleek body lines of the 8th gen. But since the wheelbase on the new car is pushed back even further than the 8th gen, and your hood is so long, it almost looks like your interior starts further back in the car. And since it's only an inch and change longer than the old generation, and you got more rear leg room, it kind of just pushed everything back, and your trunk is 3.5 inches shorter as a result, even though the car's longer. So is the extra rear leg room worth it? To me, it doesn't bother me. I would probably be fine if it still had the same proportions as the 8th gen, mainly because this car is a 6-speed manual, and I will never find myself in the back seat of this car. So I have 2 daughters, and I don't really mind the extra legroom. I mean, it doesn't really serve much benefit to me, because unless they grow up to be over 6'3", they're gonna fit perfectly fine in this car and the 8th gen. They probably would fit fine in both. If you want to look at the rear of this car, you can see how much room you have there. And I will say both seats are in the driving position now. I'll give you a leg clearance test on this one first, but it's worth noting on the new car that in my driving position, I still have, like, you know, 3 to 4 more clicks I can bring the seat back. So if you're like 6'5", 6'6", I'm actually pretty confident you could fit comfortably in the new Civic. So here's a leg test, 6'3" here. I'm sitting all the way back with my butt right now, and I have about like a 1/2 inch, but I do clear the seat in my driving position. However, if you know, no one sits perfectly flush back here, and my head, and this is you know, another reason why I didn't buy the SI, as you see in my videos, is the headroom back here. I'm definitely hitting my head, so I do have to slouch a little bit, which is going to push my knees to just touching the driving seat in a 6'3" position here. So overall, you know, the back seats are, from what I've read online, best in its class for the Civic. So don't let that stop you from buying it, because I'm kind of doing a worst case scenario test back here. So sitting behind myself in my 2010 Civic, the seat is all the way back, and that is my natural driving position. It's just long enough for me to squeeze in there comfortably. If I was any taller, I'd say I would have issues with legroom with this car, but I'm right at the limit. I think I do have a longer torso than legs compared to most people, but you'll see here, sitting in the 8th gen, and I'm all the way back too. It's kind of fooling the way these seats are designed. They have a nice cutout in here. Now this is actually very surprising to me, I have almost identical leg clearance. I do feel like I'm sitting higher up in this car, but because it's a sedan, I have probably a 1/2 inch more headroom than I did in the hatchback, the new hatchback. So definitely worth noting, and I'm actually very surprised to make that. I didn't expect, I thought my knees would be jammed in the back of my driving position right now, but they are not. So all in all, what the heck's the deal with the new Civic, man? They just moved some stuff around and didn't really actually, you know, they made the car bigger, but they didn't really make it feel bigger, to me at least. So since we're on the topic of design elements with these cars, I want to bring up something I think is pretty ironic and significant with these cars. Back in 2006, when this generation Civic came out, all the rave and all the reviewers were saying how crazy it was that they made the rear floor flat. Generally, there's a huge hump here. All the 90 Civics and the early 2000 Civics to like 05 had a big hump back here, kind of making a passenger that sits in the middle have to span their legs to the side, or they'd be obnoxiously tall and they'd have to like balance them on the little hump in the center. So the fact that Honda engineered that out in this car made things pretty good. And because of that low hump continues all the way to the front of the car, the center console in this car is massive. It is extremely deep, and that is one thing I think is pretty unique about this car, is it has, I'm gonna say it right now, it has more storage room for comfort on the inside than the new car. Another interesting comment about these cars is the hood's so much shorter. The one thing I'll say that's an advantage with the hood being longer is you have a lot more access to the engine to take a look at components, to replace things, to do oil changes. So this new Civic has a much larger hood. However, it's aluminum, so it almost feels lighter than the other car. So I wanted to point that out, but much more maintenance friendly in this car, as far as I can reach the fuel injectors and see the full intake manifold in front of this front cowl here without a problem. So alternator, super easy to change, and I can actually even get down to the AC compressor without a problem. The header is very exposed. There's, you know, like 3 or 4 inches in front of the header before the radiator, which I'm never used to. You got to do a slave cylinder bleed. It's extremely accessible. I've never seen a car more accessible to bleed the slave cylinder. There's your bleeder right there. One thing I don't like, which I'll mention in my dislikes video, is the fact that you have to share the reservoir for the brake and the clutch reservoir. Clutch fluid, I mean, is pretty upsetting, because I like to keep those systems isolated since they wear at different rates. So I'll have to keep an eye on that and probably do a lot more frequent fluid flushes on this car, just to make sure no seals break down and you have no problems there. But you do have a lot more room in the engine bay, which is something that excites me. On the 8th gen, it's a smaller engine, it's a 1.8, but you have to take this cowl off a lot to do maintenance. Like I just did a valve adjustment and it was easier for me to take this all off. It's not a big deal, it's really easy to take off, but you're a lot more crowded in here. Of course, it looks pretty dirty in here. A lot of components are fluid filmed, but your battery's right up front here, which is a much better spot for jump starting and just access to get the battery in and out of the car. I think it's a much better designed location. Because of that, you have a separate reservoir for your clutch fluid and your brake fluid. Nice separate systems. However, with the new car, you probably can save some money by just tapping in a hose on this side and eliminating all these components. You know, for someone that notices those types of things like me as a design engineer, it really kind of bothers me to see that. Thanks for watching, guys. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. It helps me out a lot. Subscribe to the channel. I have tons of new videos coming out about my 11th gen Civic Sport hatchback 6-speed manual. But let me know what you guys think about the size comparison. Certain elements you agree or disagree with. Which car do you think flows better?